The sun was low in the sky, casting long orange shadows across the dusty plains. The small cabin, made of rough-hewn logs and a patchwork of wooden boards, sat quietly at the edge of the desert. Inside, the cowboy went about his daily chores. He was a man of routine, used to the silence of the land, the steady rhythm of his own work, and the occasional visits from traders or travelers passing through. Life had taught him to rely on himself, to keep his company simple, and to avoid distractions that might disturb the fragile peace he had built in this remote corner of the world. He had lived here for many years, alone except for his horse, a sturdy brown stallion named Buck. His days were long and often hard, but he had learned to find comfort in small things. The sound of the wind rustling through the dry grass, the smell of wood smoke from his cabin stove, and the way the sky seemed to stretch forever at sunset. He liked things predictable. That was how life made sense to him, until the day she arrived. It was late in the afternoon when the door creaked open. At first, he thought it was the wind, for he rarely expected visitors. Then, he saw her. She stepped into the cabin with calm confidence, tall and graceful, her presence commanding attention without a word. The cowboy froze. He had seen many people in his life, travelers, traders, and wanderers, but none like her. She carried herself with a strength that was quiet but undeniable. Her dark hair fell loosely across her shoulders, and her eyes held a look that seemed to measure everything around her with careful thought. She was taller than anyone he had met in years, and he could not help but stare. For a moment, the silence between them felt almost heavy. The cowboy cleared his throat and stepped closer. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice steady but cautious. She looked at him and smiled faintly, a gesture that seemed both polite and self-assured. She spoke slowly in English, words that were carefully chosen. "I need shelter. I have nowhere else to go tonight." The cowboy's first instinct was caution. In these parts, strangers could bring trouble. But there was something in her eyes, a calm honesty, that made him pause. He gestured to the small chair by the stove. "Sit," he said. She moved gracefully, her steps firm on the wooden floor. It was unusual, he thought, to meet someone so different, yet not threatening. She explained that she had left her tribe, seeking safety. Her people had faced challenges, and the world beyond her home was dangerous. The cowboy listened quietly, noticing the careful way she spoke, the respect she had for the space she entered, and the dignity she carried. He nodded slowly. "You can stay for tonight," he said, "but we will need to talk more about the days ahead." The cabin felt a little less empty. As evening settled in, the cowboy set about preparing a simple meal. Beans, bread, and a little meat from his small supply. She helped quietly, offering advice about cooking that seemed practical and experienced. In moments like these, small differences faded. They shared the work naturally, moving around each other without awkwardness. He noticed her strength, the ease with which she handled tasks that required effort, and the quiet way she observed everything before acting. She was clearly not used to weakness. She had survived on her own, and it showed. After the meal, they sat near the fire. The flames flickered across their faces, casting shadows on the walls. The cowboy wondered what it was about her that made the room feel different. It wasn't just her height, or the way she moved, or even the calmness of her voice. It was the way she seemed entirely herself, without pretense, without fear. He found himself listening more than he spoke, curious about her story, about the life she had lived before this moment. She began to tell him a little about her tribe, the land she had grown up on, and the people she had known. He listened with fascination, learning about customs, traditions, and ways of living that were entirely foreign to him. He realized how little he had truly seen of the world beyond his cabin, and yet he felt a connection forming through the simple act of listening and sharing. Her words painted vivid pictures in his mind, wide-open plains, rivers that shone like silver, mountains that rose sharply against the sky. And through it all, he could feel her strength, her intelligence, and her independence. The cowboy decided to share some of his own story. He spoke of the years he had spent in solitude, the struggles to maintain the land, and the moments of quiet joy he had found in small successes. She listened with interest, asking questions that showed she understood more than most people he had met. There was no judgment, no expectation, just a natural curiosity and respect for one another's lives. As night deepened, the desert outside became colder. He offered her a blanket, and she accepted it with a nod of thanks. He noticed how she adapted to the space, making herself comfortable, without imposing. It was rare, he thought, to meet someone who could enter another person's world without disturbing it. Yet, she had done so effortlessly. He felt a mixture of admiration and surprise. Hours passed as they continued to talk by the fire. The cowboy found himself laughing at small stories from her childhood, tales of mischievous friends and clever tricks. She, in turn, smiled at his quiet humor, the kind that came from years of living simply and observing life closely. The cabin, once silent and lonely, now held a sense of shared warmth. He realized that this encounter, so unexpected, was changing the rhythm of his days. It was strange, unsettling, yet comforting. Before sleep, he stepped outside briefly to check on Buck, the horse, and the night sky stretched endlessly above him. Stars glittered in the dark, and the cool night air smelled of sagebrush and dust. When he returned inside, he saw her quietly arranging her space to rest, careful not to disturb him or the cabin. He realized that despite her imposing height and strong presence, there was also a gentleness, a thoughtfulness, that balanced it. He lay in his bedroll that night thinking about her. How she had arrived unexpectedly, taller and stronger than he had anticipated, yet full of quiet humility and courage. He realized that appearances could be misleading. Her height was striking, but it was her character, her spirit, and her presence that truly stood out. The cowboy drifted into sleep with a sense of anticipation he hadn't felt in years. Tomorrow, he knew, would bring more questions, more conversations, and perhaps a deeper understanding of this unusual visitor who had entered his solitary life. By the first light of dawn, he was awake, watching as she moved about the cabin, preparing for the day. She carried herself with the same quiet strength he had noticed the day before. He saw her skill in handling the simple tasks of survival, her careful observation of the cabin and the land around it. He felt respect, admiration, and curiosity intertwine. For the first time in a long while, he was not alone, not just in presence, but in thought and spirit. That morning, they shared a simple breakfast. Words were fewer, but understanding was deeper. The cowboy realized that his life, once predictable and isolated, now held a spark of change. He didn't yet know the challenges that would come with this encounter, but he felt ready, in a way he had not expected. He had learned that strength could take many forms, that courage could be quiet as well as loud, and that respect was earned through actions as much as words. Part 1 of this story closes with a quiet moment. The cowboy stepping outside, looking at the vast plains, and seeing her moving through the cabin with purposeful grace. He remembered the first moment he had seen her, surprised by her height, and now understood that it was only a small part of what made her remarkable. In her presence, he felt a shift in himself, a new awareness that life could still surprise, even in the quietest corners of the world. The horizon stretched endlessly before them, full of possibility. And he knew that tomorrow, their story would continue, shaping both their lives in ways he could not yet imagine. The morning sun bathed the plains in soft gold, and the cabin seemed to glow in its warmth. The cowboy stepped outside, stretching and taking a deep breath of the crisp air. The Apache bride was already busy, gathering kindling and checking on the small garden patch he had been tending. He watched her for a moment, noting how naturally she moved through the tasks. It was as if she belonged in the open land, her presence blending with the rhythm of life around the cabin. The days that followed settled into a new rhythm. Together, they worked the land, tended to the animals, and repaired the cabin. She was skilled with her hands, learning quickly the ways of frontier living. Yet she also taught him new methods she had learned from her people. He realized that life had become richer, more complete, because of her presence. Though the cabin was small, it became a place of learning and understanding. They spoke often about their cultures, sharing stories from her tribe and his experiences in the wild. The cowboy learned about the ceremonies and traditions that had guided her people for generations. She learned about the hard lessons of frontier life, the solitude, and the ways a person must rely on patience, skill, and observation. They began to see not just each other's differences, but the strengths and wisdom those differences brought. Yet the world beyond their cabin did not always welcome them. The local townsfolk noticed the unusual pair, and often looked with suspicion. The cowboy, who had long avoided conflict, found himself explaining her presence to curious or skeptical neighbors. Some whispered about her origin. Some questioned the wisdom of sheltering someone so different. The Apache bride faced the same challenge, though she met it with dignity. She carried herself with quiet confidence, never responding to ignorance with anger, but with a calm understanding that spoke louder than words. One afternoon, a group of townspeople stopped by. They came with polite smiles, but sharp eyes, curious and cautious. The cowboy greeted them carefully, introducing her simply as a guest who had been traveling and needed shelter. She nodded politely, meeting their gaze with calm assurance. They asked questions, probing, testing, and he answered honestly. By the end of the visit, the tension eased slightly. They had seen the respect and understanding between the two, and slowly, they began to accept the unusual friendship forming in the cabin at the edge of the plains. As the days grew warmer, they spent more time outside, working the land and sharing stories around the fire in the evening. The Apache bride told tales of her childhood, stories of cleverness, bravery, and lessons learned from her elders. She spoke of her tribe's love for the land, their respect for animals, and the balance they sought with nature. The cowboy listened, fascinated, occasionally asking questions that drew out more detail. In return, he shared his own stories, long journeys across harsh terrain, nights spent alone under starlit skies, and the quiet victories of self-reliance. Through these exchanges, a mutual understanding grew. The cowboy realized that her strength was not only physical, but also emotional and mental. She had endured hardships and danger with courage, and had not let the world harden her heart. She, in turn, saw the kindness and integrity in him, the patience it took to live in isolation, and the way he respected life around him. Together, they began to form a bond deeper than friendship, a connection built on trust, respect, and admiration. Life in the cabin was not without its small challenges. A sudden summer storm brought heavy rain, and they had to reinforce the roof to prevent leaks. She showed ingenuity, using materials in ways the cowboy had never thought of. In turn, he taught her practical tricks for frontier survival: how to secure supplies, store water, and maintain tools. Their teamwork became seamless, a silent communication that required little explanation. Through these tasks, their admiration for each other's skills grew even stronger. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat by the fire, exhausted but satisfied. The firelight flickered across their faces, highlighting features shaped by sun, wind, and experience. The cowboy noticed how her eyes reflected not just the flames, but her intelligence and warmth. He realized that his initial surprise at her height had been superficial compared to the depth of character he now saw. Her height had commanded attention at first, but her courage, wisdom, and calm strength had captured his respect and admiration. As weeks passed, they also began to understand the emotional side of each other. She spoke of loneliness she had felt before traveling, of the uncertainty of leaving her home, and of the hope she carried for a better life. He admitted the solitude he had grown used to, the quiet days that were comforting but also empty in ways he had not realized. Sharing these feelings, they discovered empathy and companionship. Two souls, recognizing that they had found understanding in each other. The local community, while slow to accept them, began to notice the positive changes. The way they worked together, supported each other, and treated the land with respect did not go unnoticed. Some neighbors began to seek their advice for practical matters. And gradually, the whispers of suspicion turned into quiet respect. The cowboy and the Apache bride became an example of cooperation and trust, a living reminder that differences need not divide, and that shared values could unite even the most unlikely pair. There were moments of humor, too. One afternoon, while fixing a fence, she playfully teased him for trying to lift a heavy log the wrong way. He laughed, admitting his mistake, and she joined in, making the laborious task feel lighter. These small moments built familiarity and joy, balancing the hard work of frontier life with laughter and companionship. Through these shared experiences, they grew closer, each learning to appreciate the other in ways that went beyond appearances or initial judgments. One night, under a sky crowded with stars, the cowboy and the Apache bride sat quietly outside, listening to the distant calls of coyotes and the whispering wind. He realized that the cabin, once a place of solitude and routine, had become a home filled with learning, respect, and mutual care. She looked at him and smiled, a simple gesture that carried warmth and trust. He responded with a nod, understanding that they had both found something rare. Not just shelter or safety, but a true connection. As the seasons began to change, so did their lives. The harsh summer heat gave way to cooler autumn winds, and the land itself seemed to reflect their growth. Crops matured, the animals thrived, and their bond became stronger with each passing day. The cowboy often thought back to the first moment he had seen her, taller than anyone he had ever met, and how that height had startled him. Now he understood that what truly mattered was not how tall she was, but the strength of her heart, her intelligence, and her courage. Challenges continued, of course. There were days when supplies ran low, when storms threatened the cabin, and when they had to make difficult decisions about how to manage the land. Yet through every obstacle, they worked together, learning to anticipate each other's thoughts and actions. The cowboy noticed how naturally she led when necessary, yet also how she trusted him to make decisions when his experience mattered most. It was a partnership built on mutual respect, balance, and understanding. Toward the end of autumn, they shared a quiet celebration of the harvest, gathering the fruits of their labor and reflecting on what they had achieved together. There was no grand ceremony, no need for words to express the bond they shared. In their daily actions, their laughter, and the care they showed each other, the depth of their connection was clear. They had learned to see beyond appearances, beyond fear or prejudice, to the true qualities that made a person remarkable. The story closes on a serene moment. The cowboy and the Apache bride stand side by side, looking out over the plains, the sun setting in brilliant hues of orange and purple. He remembers the first time he had stared at her, surprised by her height and presence. Now, he sees her fully, strong, brave, wise, and kind. She turns to him and smiles, and he feels a sense of gratitude, not just for her presence, but for the way she had changed his life. Together, they face the horizon, ready for whatever challenges and joys the future may hold. Knowing that they have found in each other a companion, a partner, and a friend who understands and values them completely.